Cowardice asks, the question, is it safe? Expediency asks, the question, is it politic? Vanity asks, the question, is it popular? But conscience asks, the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but he must do it because conscience tells him it is right.
Every time our country stands in the path of danger, an instinct seems to summon her finest first, those who truly understand her. When freedom shivers in the cold shadow of true peril, it's always the patriots who first hear the call. When loss of liberty is looming, as it is now, the siren sounds first in the hearts of freedom's vanguard.
Fighting for humanity and against globalism, one mind at a time. It's the Freedom Link with Joe Joseph.
Yes, welcome everybody to another exciting edition of the Freedom Link. Yes, it is us, it is I, it's Joe and Scotty, and we're here. Scotty, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing fantastic.
Oh, that's good, man. Well, we don't have a lot of time tonight to do a lot of speaking per se, because our broadcast tonight's going to take you down a historical walk, if you will. And in this case, I find deathbed or I'm just about to die, let me get it off my chest interviews is some of the best ones ever. So our number one, we're going to get into the confession or the death, I'm about to die, let me give you the straight poop from Norman Dodd. Norman Dodd was the general counsel for the Reese Committee. And if you don't know what the Reese Committee was, back in the 1950s, as a response to the Red Scare, Representative Carol Reese commissioned Norman Dodd to look into the endowments, like the Ford Foundation, the Guggenheim Foundation, the DuPont, you name it. You'll often see them on PBS. This programming is brought to you by the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, that kind of stuff. So you'll see that a lot in public broadcasting. But this is going to knock your socks off. A lot of people don't know about Norman Dodd. Now, Ed Griffin and myself and Popeye have been friends for, God knows, almost 20 years. And the guy is a legend. He is as OG as OG gets.
Yeah.
When it comes to this kind of stuff. Back when you had to go to university libraries and actually go and hunt this stuff out. He was doing it. Pivotal works like A World Without Cancer. Another great documentary back when it was on film strip. Think about that. It was on film strip. That's when it first came out. So, without further ado, I am going to pull it out. The Norman Dodd interview. And this one here is sure to knock your socks off. But if you want to know why America's being demoralized, if you want to know what's happening, this is how it all began. And they've never stopped it. So check this out. Here we go.
Mr. Dodd, let's begin this interview by a brief statement for the record, telling us who you are, what your background is, and your qualifications to speak on this subject.
Well, Mr. Griffin, as for who I am just, as the name implies, an individual born in New Jersey and educated in private schools, eventually in a school called Andover, Massachusetts, and then Yale University. And running through my whole period of being brought up and growing up, I have been an indefatigable reader, And I have had one major interest, and that was this country, as I was led to believe it was originally founded. And I entered the world of business knowing absolutely nothing about how that world operated, and realized that the only way to find out what that world was consisted of would be to become part of it. And I then acquired some experience in the manufacturing world, and then in the world of international communication, and finally chose banking as the field I wish to devote my life to. And I was fortunate enough to secure a position in one of the important banks in New York, and lived there. I lived through the conditions which led up to what is known as the crash of 1929. And I witnessed what is tantamount to a collapse of the structure of the United States as a whole. And much to my surprise, I was confronted by my superiors in the middle of the panic in which they were immersed. I was confronted with the question, Norm, what do we do now? I was 30 at the time, and I had no more right to have an answer to that question than the man in the moon. However, I did manage to say to my superiors, gentlemen, you take this experience as proof of something that you do not know about banking, and you better go find out what that something is and act accordingly. 4 days later, I was confronted by the same superiors with a statement to the effect that, Norm, you go find out. And I really was fool enough to accept that assignment, because it meant that you were going out to search for something and nobody could tell you what you were looking for. But I felt so strongly on the subject that I consented to. I was relieved of all normal duties inside the bank. And 2.5 years later, I felt that it was possible to report back to those who had given me this assignment. And so I rendered such a report. And as a result of the report I rendered, I was told the following, Norm, what you're saying is we should return to sound banking. And I said, yes, in essence, that's exactly what I'm saying. Whereupon I got my first shock, which was a statement from them to this effect. We will never see sound banking in the United States again. And they cited chapter and verse to support that statement. And what they cited was as follows. Since the end of World War I, we have been responsible for what they call the institutionalizing of conflicting interests. And they are so prevalent inside this country that they can never be resolved. This came to me as an extraordinary shock, because the men who made the statement were men who were deemed as the most prominent bankers in the country. The bank of which I was a part was spoken of as a Morgan bank. And coming from men of that caliber, a statement of that kind made a tremendous impression on me. And the type of impression that it made on me was I wondered if I, as an individual and it's what they call a junior officer of the bank, could, with the same enthusiasm, foster the progress and the policies of the bank. I spent about a year trying to think this out and came to the conclusion that I would have to resign. I did resign, and as a consequence of that, had this experience. When my letter of resignation reached the desk of the president of the bank, he sent for me. And then I came to visit with him, and he stated to me, "Norm, I have your letter, but I don't believe you understand what's happened in the last 10 days. And I said, "No, Mr. Cochran, I have no idea what's happened." Well, he said, "The directors have never been able to get your report to them out of their mind. And as a result, they have decided that you, as an individual, must begin at once, and you must reorganize this bank in keeping with your own ideas." And he then said, "Now, can I tear up your letter?" And inasmuch as what had been said to me was offering me, at the age of, by then, 33, about as fine an opportunity for service to the country as I could imagine, I said yes. And they said they wished me to begin at once. And I did, and suddenly, in the span of about 6 weeks, I was not permitted to do another piece of work. And every time I brought the subject up, I was kind of patted on the back and said, and told, "Stop worrying about it, Norm. Pretty soon you'll be a vice president, and then you will have quite a handsome salary and ultimately be able to retire on a very worthwhile pension. In the meantime, you can play golf and tennis to your heart's content on weekends." Well, Mr. Griffin, I found I couldn't do it. I spent a year figuratively with my feet on the desk doing nothing, and I just couldn't adjust to it. So I did resign. And this time, my resignation stuck. And then I got my second shock, which was the discovery that the doors of every bank in the United States were closed to me, and I never could get a job, as it were, in a bank. So I found myself, for the first time since I'd graduated from college, out of a job. And from there on, I followed various branches of the financial world, ranging from investment counsel to membership of the stock exchange, and finally ended up as an advisor to a few individuals who had capital funds to look after. In the meantime, my major interest became very specific, which was to endeavor, by some means, of getting the educational world to actually, you might say, teach the subject of economics realistically and move it away from the support of various speculative activities that characterize our country. And I have had that interest. And you know how, as you generate a specific interest, you find yourself gravitating toward persons with similar interests. And ultimately, I found myself kind of the center of the world of dissatisfaction with the direction that this country was headed. And that's on one direction. And the same way, I found myself in contact with many individuals who, on their own, had done a vast amount of studying and research in areas which were part of the problem. And
well, Mr. Dyer, if I may interrupt here for a second. At what point in your career did you become connected with the Reese Committee?
1953.
1953.
Yeah.
And what was that capacity, sir?
That was the capacity of what they call Director of Research for the Reese Committee.
Can you tell us what the Reese Committee was attempting to do?
Yes, I can tell you. It was operating and carrying out instructions embodied in a resolution passed by the House of Representatives, which was to investigate the activities of foundations as to whether or not these activities could justifiably be labeled un-American without, I might say, defining what they meant by un-American. But that was the resolution. And the committee had then the task of selecting a council, and the council in turn had the task of selecting a staff. And he had to have somebody who would direct the work of that staff. And that was what they meant by the Director of Research.
What were some of the details, the specifics that you told the committee at that time?
Well, Mr. Griffin, in that report, I specifically, number one, defined what was, to us, what was meant by the phrase un-American. And we defined that in our way as being a determination to effect changes in the country by unconstitutional means. We have plenty of constitutional procedures, assuming that we wish to effect a change in the form of government or that sort of thing. And therefore, any effort in that direction which did not avail itself of the procedures which were authorized by the Constitution could be justifiably called un-American. That was the start of educating them up to that particular point. The next thing was to educate them as to the effect on the country as a whole of the activities of large endowed foundations over the then past 40 years.
What was that effect, sir?
That effect was to orient our educational system away from support of the principles embodied in the Declaration of Independence and implemented in the Constitution, and educated them over to the idea that the task now was, as a result of the orientation of education, to away from these briefly stated principles and self-evident truths. And that's what had been the effect of the wealth, which constituted the endowments of those foundations that had been in existence over the largest portion of the span of 50 years, and holding them responsible for this change. And what we were able to bring forward was that what we had uncovered was the determination of these large endowed foundations through their trustees to actually get control over the content of American education.
There's quite a bit of publicity given to your conversation with Rowan Gaither. would you please tell us who he was and what was that conversation you had with him?
Ron Gaither was at that time president of the Ford Foundation. And Mr. Gaither had sent for me when I found it convenient to be in New York, asked me to call upon him at his office, which I did. And on arrival, after a few amenities, Mr. Gaither said, "Mr. Dodd, we've asked you to come up here today because we thought that possibly off the record, you would tell us why the Congress is interested in the activities of foundations such as ourselves." And before I could think of how I would reply to that statement, Mr. Gaither then went on voluntarily and stated, he said, "Mr. Dodd, all of us that have a hand in the making of policies here have had experience either with the OSS during the war or the European Economic Administration after the war. We've had experience operating under directives, and these directives emanate and did emanate from the White House. Now we still operate under just such directives. Would you like to know what the substance of these directives is?" I said, "Yes, Mr. Gaither, I'd like very much to know." Whereupon he made this statement to me, namely, "Mr. Dodd, we here operate on in response to similar directives, the substance of which is that we shall use our grant-making power so to alter life in the United States that it can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union." Well, parenthetically, Mr. Griffin, I nearly fell off the chair. I, of course, didn't, but my response to Mr. Gaither then was, "Well, Mr. Gaither, I can now answer your first question. You forced the Congress of the United States to spend $150,000 to find out what you just told me. So why don't you?" I said, "Of course, legally, you're entitled to make grants for this purpose. But I don't think you're entitled to withhold that information from the people of the country to whom you're indebted for your tax exemption. So why don't you tell the people of the country that's what you told me?" And his answer was, "We would not think of doing any such thing." So then I said, "Well, Mr. Gaither, obviously, you forced the Congress to spend this money in order to find out what you just told me."
Mr. Dodd, you have spoken before about some interesting things that were discovered by Catherine Casey at the Carnegie Endowment. Can you tell us that story, please?
Yes, I'm glad to, Mr. Griffin. This experience that you have just referred to came about in response to a letter which I had written to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, asking certain questions and gathering certain information. And on the arrival of that letter, Dr. Johnson, who was then president of the Carnegie Endowment, telephoned me and said, "Did I ever come up to New York?" And I said, "Yes, I did, more or less each weekend." And he said, "Well, when you're next here, will you drop in and see us?" Which I did. And again, on arrival at the office of the endowment, I found myself in the presence of Dr. Joseph Johnson, the president, who was a successor to Alger Hiss, two vice presidents, and their own counsel, a partner in the firm, Sullivan and Cromwell. And Dr. Johnson said, after, again, amenities, "Mr. Dodd, we have your letter. We can answer all those questions, but it'd be a great deal of trouble. And we have a counter suggestion. And our counter suggestion is that if you can spare a member of your staff for 2 weeks and send that member up to New York, we will give to that member a room in the library and the minute books of this foundation since its inception. And we think that whatever you want to find out or the Congress wants to find out will be obvious from those minutes. Well, my first reaction was they lost their mind. I had a pretty good idea of what those minutes would contain, but I realized that Dr. Johnson had only been in office 2 years, and the vice presidents were relatively young men, and counsel seemed to be also a young man, and I guessed that probably they'd never read the minutes themselves. And so I said I had somebody, I would take it. I would accept their offer, and I went back to Washington, and I selected the member of my staff who was on my staff, having been a practicing attorney in Washington, but she was on my staff to see to it that I didn't break any congressional procedures or rules. In addition to which, she was unsympathetic to the purpose of the investigation. She was level-headed and a very reasonably brilliant, capable lady. And her attitude toward the investigation was, what could possibly be wrong with foundations? They do so much good. Well, in the face of that sincere conviction of Catherine's, I went out of my way not to prejudice her in any way. But I did explain to her that she couldn't possibly cover 50 years of handwritten minutes in 2 weeks. So she would have to do what we call spot reading. And I blocked out certain periods of time to concentrate on. And off she went to New York. She came back at the end of 2 weeks with the following in the way of on dictaphone belts. We are now at the year 1908, which was the year that the Carnegie began operations. And in that year, the trustees, meeting for the first time, raised a specific question, which they discussed throughout the balance of the year in a very learned fashion. And the question is there any means known more effective than war, assuming you wish to alter the life of an entire people? And they conclude that no more effective means than war to that end is known to humanity. So then in 1909, they raised the second question and discussed it, namely, how do we involve the United States in a war? Well, I doubt at that time if there was any subject more removed from the thinking of most of the people of this country than its involvement in a war. There were intermittent shows in the Balkans, but I doubt very much if many people even knew where the Balkans was. Then finally, they answer that question as follows. We must control the State Department. And then that very naturally raises the question of how do we do that? And they answer it by saying, we must take over and control the diplomatic machinery of this country. And finally, they resolve to aim at that as an objective. Then time passes, and we are eventually in a war, which would have been World War I. And at that time, they record on their minutes a shocking report in which they dispatched to President Wilson a telegram cautioning him to see that the war does not end too quickly. And finally, of course, the war is over. At that time, their interest shifts over to preventing what they call a reversion of life in the United States to what it was prior to 1914, when World War I broke out. And they arrive at that point, they come to the conclusion that to prevent a reversion, we must control education in the United States. And they realize that that's a pretty big task. So to them, it is too big for them alone, so they approach the Rockefeller Foundation with the suggestion that that portion of education which could be considered domestic be handled by the Rockefeller Foundation, and that portion which is international should be handled by the endowment. And they then decide that the key to the success of these two operations lay in an alteration in the teaching of American history. So they approach 4 of the then most prominent teachers of American history in the country, people like Charles and Mary Bird, and their suggestion to them is, will they alter the manner in which they present this subject, and they get turned down flat. So they then decide that it is necessary for them to do, as they say, build our own stable of historians. And then they approach the Guggenheim Foundation, which specializes in fellowships, and say, when we find young men in the process of studying for doctorates in the field of American history, and we feel that they are the right caliber, will you grant them fellowships on our say-so? And the answer is yes. So under that condition, eventually they assemble 20. And they take this 20 potential teachers of American history to London, and there they're briefed into what is expected of them when, as and if they secure appointments in keeping with the doctorates they will have earned. And that group of 20 historians ultimately becomes the nucleus of the American Historical Association. And then toward the end of the 1920s, the endowment grants to the American Historical Association $400,000 for a study of our history in a manner which points to what can this country can it look forward to in the future. And that culminates in a 7-volume study, the last volume of which is, of course, in essence, a summary of the contents of the other 6. And the essence of the last volume is the future of this country belongs to collectivism administered with characteristic American efficiency. That's the story that ultimately grew out of, and of course was what could have been presented by the members of this congressional committee to the Congress as a whole for just exactly what it said. But they never got to that point.
This is the story that emerged from the minutes of the Carnegie Fund.
That's right.
Carnegie Endowment
That's
Fund.
right.
And so
it was official to that extent.
I see. And Catherine Casey brought all of these back in the form of dictated notes or verbatim readings of the minutes.
On dictaphone belts.
Are those in existence today?
I don't know. If they are, they're somewhere in the archives. under the control of the Congress, House of Representatives.
How many people actually heard those, or were they typed up transcripts made of them? How many people actually heard those recordings?
Oh, 3 maybe. Myself, my top assistants, and Catherine. Yeah, I might tell you this experience as far as its impact on Catherine Casey was concerned was she never was able to return to her law practice. If it hadn't been for Carol Reese's ability to tuck her away on a job with the Federal Trade Commission, I don't know what would have happened to Catherine, but ultimately she lost her mind as a result of it. Terrible shock to her. It's a very rough experience to encounter proof of these kinds.
Mr. Dodd, what kind, can you summarize the opposition to the committee, the Reese Committee, and particularly the efforts to sabotage the committee?
Well, they began right at the start of the work of an operating staff, Mr. Griffin. And it began on the day in which the committee met for the purpose of consenting to or confirming my appointment to the position of Director of Research. Thanks to the abstention of the minority members of the committee, that is the 2 Democratic members, from voting, why technically I was unanimously appointed. And
well, wasn't the White House involved in opposition to the committee?
Not at this particular point, sir. Mr. Reese ordered counsel and myself to visit Wayne Hayes. Wayne Hayes was the ranking minority member of the committee as a Democrat. So counsel and I had to go down to Mr. Hayes' office, which we did. Mr. Hayes greeted us with the flat statement directed primarily to me, which was that I am opposed to this investigation. I regard it as nothing but an effort on the part of Carol Reese to gain a little prominence, and so I'll do everything I can to see that it fails. Well, I am kind of a strange personality in the sense that a challenge of that nature interests me. Our counsel withdrew. He went over and sat on a couch on Mr. Reese's office and pouted. But I sort of took up this statement of Hayes as a challenge and set myself the goal of winning him over to our point of view. And I started by noticing on his desk that there was a book. And the book was of the type that there are many in these days that would be complaining about the spread of communism in Hungary, or that type of book. And this meant to me that at least Hayes read a book. And so I brought up the subject of the spread of the influence of the Soviet world, and for 2 hours discussed this with Hayes, and finally ended up with his rising from his desk and saying, Norm, if you will carry this investigation toward the goal as you've outlined it to me, I'll be your biggest supporter. I said, Mr. Hayes, I can assure you that I will not double cross you. Subsequently, Mr. Hayes sent word to me that he was in the Bethesda hospital with an attack of ulcers, but would I come and see him, which I did. He then said, Norm, the only reason I've asked you to come out here is I just want to hear you say again, you will not double cross me. I gave him that assurance, and that was the basis of our relationship. Meantime, counsel took the attitude expressed in these words: Norm, if you want to waste your time with this guy, as he called him, you can go ahead and do it, but don't ever ask me to say anything to him under any condition on any subject. So, in a sense, that cleared the decks for me to operate in relation to Hayes on my own. And as time passed, Hayes offered friendship, which I hesitated to accept because of his vulgarity. And I didn't want to get mixed up with him socially under any condition. Well, that was our relationship for about 3 months, and then eventually I had occasion to add to my staff, and as a result of adding to my staff a top flight intelligence officer, both the Republican National Committee and the White House were resorted to stop me from continuing this investigation in the direction that Carol Reese had personally asked me to do, which was to utilize this investigation, Mr. Griffin, to uncover the fact that this country had been the victim of a conspiracy. That was Mr. Reese's conviction. I eventually agreed to carry it out. I explained to Mr. Reese that his own counsel wouldn't go in that direction. He gave me permission to disregard our own counsel. And I had then to set up an aspect of the investigation outside of our office, more or less secret. And the Republican National Committee got wind of what I was doing, and they did everything they could to stop me. They appealed to counsel to stop me, and finally they resorted to the White House.
Was their objection because of what you were doing, or because of the fact that you were doing it outside of the official auspices of the committee?
No, their objection was, as they put it, my devotion to what they call anti-Semitism. That was a cooked-up idea, but in other words, it wasn't true at all. But anyway, that's the way I expressed it. And
excuse me, why
and
did
they made it stick.
Why did they do that? How could they say that?
Well, they could say it, Mr. Griffin, but they had to have something in the way of a rationalization of their decision to do everything they could to stop the completion of this investigation in the direction that it was moving, which would have been an exposure of this Carnegie Endowment story and the Ford Foundation and the Guggenheim and the Rockefeller Foundation, all working in harmony toward the control of education in the United States. Well, in any event, to secure the help of the White House in the picture, they assigned, they got the White House to cause the liaison personality between the White House and the Hill, a major person, to go up to Hayes and try to get him to, as it were, actively oppose what the investigation was engaged in. And Hayes then would listen to this visit from major person. Then he would call me and say, Norm, come up to my office. I have a good deal to tell you. I would go up. He'd tell me, I've just had a visit from major person, and he wants me to break up this investigation. So I then say, well, Wayne, what did you do? What did you say to him? He said, I just told him to get the hell out. And he did that 3 times, and I got pretty proud of him in the sense that he was, as it were, backing me up. And we finally embarked upon hearings at Hayes' request because he wanted to get them out of the way before he went abroad in the summer. And
But why were the hearings finally terminated? What happened to the committee?
what happened to the committee or the
Or
hearing?
the hearings. The hearings.
Oh, the hearings were terminated. Carol Reese was up against such a furor as Hayes through the activity of our own counsel. Hayes became convinced that he was being double-crossed, and he put on a show in a public hearing room, Mr. Griffin, that was an absolute disgrace. And he called Carol Reese publicly every name in the book, and Mr. Reese took this as proof that he couldn't continue the hearings. He actually invited me to accompany him when he went down to Hayes' office, and in my presence, with the tears rolling down his face, Hayes apologized to Carol Reese for whatever he'd done and his conduct, and apologized to me. And I thought that would be enough and Carol would resume. But he never did.
The charge of anti-Semitism is kind of intriguing to me. What was the basis of that charge? Was there any basis for it at all?
No, the basis that the Republican National Committee used was that the intelligence officer I'd taken on my staff, when I oriented this investigation to the exposure of and proof of a conspiracy, was known to have a book, and the book was deemed to be anti-Semitic. This was childish, but this was the second in command of the Republican National Committee, and he told me I would have to dismiss this person from my staff.
Who was that person, sir? Who was that person?
The person?
Yes.
A Colonel Lee Lorraine.
Lee Lorraine.
Yeah.
And what was his book? Do you recall? The title of his book?
The book they referred to was called Waters Flowing Eastward, which was a very castigation of the Jewish influence in the world.
What were some of the other charges made by Mr. Hayes against Mr. Reese?
Oh, just that Mr. Reese was utilizing this investigation for his own prominence inside the House of Representatives. That was the only charge Hayes could think of.
How would you describe the motivation of the people who created the foundations, the big foundations in the very beginning? What was their motivation?
Their motivation, well, let's take Mr. Carnegie as an example. His publicly declared and steadfast interest was to counteract the departure of the colonies from Great Britain. He was devoted to just putting the pieces back together again.
Would that have required the collectivism that they were dedicated to?
No. These policies or the foundation's allegiance to these un-American concepts are all traceable to the transfer of the funds over into the hands of trustees, Mr. Griffin. Not the men who had a hand in the creation of the wealth that led to the endowment of, or as a use of that wealth for what we would call public purposes.
It was a subversion of the original intent then.
Oh, yeah, completely so. And that we got into the world traditionally of bankers and lawyers.
How do you see that the purpose and direction of the major foundations has changed over the years to the present? What is it today?
Oh, 100% behind meeting the cost of education, such as it is presented through the schools and colleges of the United States, on the subject of our history has proven our original ideas to be no longer practical. The future belongs to a collectivistic concept, and there's just no disagreement on this.
Why do the foundations generously support communist causes in the United States?
Well, because to them, what communism represents a means of developing what we call a monopoly. That is, the organization, will say, of large-scale industry into an administrable unit.
Do they think that they will be one of the administrators?
They will be the beneficiaries of it, yes.
So there you go. That is an unbelievable interview and a kind of journey, if you will, into what is truly at the core of change.
Right.
Right? Think about it. So now, mind you, this goes back to the money trust. This was Charles Lindbergh Sr. This was McCormick-Dickstein Committee. This is J.P. Morgan. This is, all of the big hitters, not the men themselves, right? Here's the interesting thing. Not the men themselves, although most are outspoken during that time as far as their beliefs. Henry Ford was a big one, and hugely against what he deemed as the Jewish subversion of America, and was openly open supporter of Germany during World War II, at the start of World War II and leading up to it. As a matter of fact, Ford was one of the major providers of equipment to the Nazis at the start of the war and even leading up to. But the people that were entrusted with the money from these Rockefellers, the Guggenheims, the Fords, the DuPonts, all of those families left their foundations a ton of money. These trustees, if you will. And they were the people that met, that colluded, that brought about a subversion of America, that you didn't need war. Now, you need chaos, because chaos is pivotal to this. You've got to have chaos because people want peace and safety. Remember that, because you're going to hear it a lot. You're going to hear it now on the radio. You're going to hear it on TV. Everywhere you listen, you're going to hear peace and safety. And the message of peace and safety, because that's what appeals to the person's reptilian mind, or portion of the brain that is all about survivability and reproducibility. That is our core. It's who we are at our very carnal animal stuff, right? Yeah. Same with speed metal. Yeah. Yeah. So you see that, Scotty, right? You see it's these very, very shadow-like people that you never hear about, that got together. They conspired. Interestingly enough, his attorney, the one that Catherine, can't remember her last name, goes from D.C. to New York. does the dictaphone Guggenheim minutes, and they listen to it, and she's the one that went bonkers, and literally she eventually died of like a stroke.
It was such a mind-blowing thing that it basically it broke her, basically, to realize that there was a conspiracy of that level to fundamentally change the United States and take over the educational system. I mean, that's wild. That's a heavy thing to lay your eyes on, and
that's right. And that's kind of why. And don't think, by the way, that this stopped happening. Of course, it didn't stop happening. They scuttled the committee because think of the power that these gentlemen wielded in 1953-54. Think about that. This was right around the time, like I say, where you had
you were reaching the apex of like military industrial complex. Their pinnacle of empowerment. Just we're coming right out of World War II. Yeah. Everybody's developing all of this stuff. I mean, that was like the pinnacle of their influence and power at that time.
Wicked, polarized was the world at that time. When we come back, we'll talk more about that for sure. And then we're going to get into another guy that went to prison for just using his mouthpiece, if you will, his ability to spread the word about the New World Order, or what he saw was this New World Order established, much like Dodd was trying to show how these trustees and endowments pushed it. You had a pastor, Ken Hovind, that was doing the same thing, went to prison for it. We'll play some of him when we get back. So don't go away. Wow. Hour one's done, but we'll be right back. KGRADB.com. Don't go away.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Are you looking to go on a faraway journey that is magical and mysterious, reaping on mystical legends? If so, then Mysterious Adventure Tours is perfect for you. Imagine a voyage to explore ancient mysteries of Ireland, haunted majesties of Scotland, or their chilling Birth of the Vampires in Romania. These small, esoteric getaways are limited and do fill fast. So, go to MysteriousAdventureTours.com and book your trip soon.
It's not just a donation.
It's a warm blanket.
It's a bottle of clean water.
It's a roof and a bed.
It's knowing someone cares.
It's feeling safe.
It's a today that's better than yesterday.
Every dollar you can spare helps so much more than you can imagine. Please, donate now to help people affected by Hurricane Ian. Your support is urgently needed.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
Hour number 2 of the Freedom Link. Yes, it has been.
Indeed.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed, do. Yeah. Popeye coming up too after us, 10 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you stay tuned because he's another guy that likes to bludgeon you with a nail bat of history, which I oftentimes enjoy getting from him when he can. Right now, he can't do anything. He looks like almost like the abominable snowman. I mean, seriously, dude, because he's turning white too. That's the problem. He's getting old like me. He and I were like, we used to make fun of Griff because he was the old crotchety curmudgeon, and now we're becoming it. It's bad, very bad, not good. So, any thoughts about what we were talking about in hour 1 with really how we've become subverted? You know, you look at demoralization, and Popeye uses that Russian spy or Russian guy that came over here,
Yuri Bezmenov.
Yes, that Ed Griffin. There he is. He did it again. You know, it's funny that all of these people, when you get to like root cause, funny thing is like in corporate America, you've got this obsession with root cause with everything. Almost OCD like. And so when you get to root cause of this, this is it. This is where it starts. Right there. It started with it's like a virus. Right? They start with, oh well, let's see, how do we do this? Well, let's go to the Guggenheims because they give out these endowments to people that are going for their doctorates in US history. And let's get ones that'll play ball with us. So they start with 20 and they deploy them out there. And then they start writing the curriculums for
They were the seed.
Yes.
That everything spread from, and
oh man,
it's wild, right? And when you hear about the goals of these foundations and endowments and all of that, and when Norman Dodd was like, hey, they said that they want to move everyone to a more collectivist system, but with the efficiency of like American capital, right? And what do you get when you look at China right now? What's their system? It's a collectivist system with an overlay of capitalist sort of, so it's interesting to see, and China is kind of the blueprint that they want to move everyone towards.
They're the beta. They're the beta, right? They're the ones. They're like the California of the world.
Right. They're the beta test for all of this. And I just find that interesting, right? That was their goal way back then, and then you see it sort of play out in the system.
Striking.
And it's wild,
It's also why you see the subversion or the lack thereof of faith, the erosion of anybody that has faith in anything other than the government. You are wrong. And it's funny too, because they use excuses like sexuality, anything that you can throw out there to create chaos enough for the government to step in with their one tool, and that's the hammer, right? That's what they do. Give them an excuse, and they're going to step in and control it. Remember that. So that's what you see, and they're getting granular, Scotty. They're getting granular now by picking these very sensitive issues to take advantage of.
And it's not just those original foundations, that are still involved. You've got new foundations that have popped up since then that have kind of taken on the roles and are continuing, that they're kind of like passing the baton to, right, and carrying on this sort of agenda that they have. Like, I mean, look, you have like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, doing the same kind of stuff, right, and so they got the ball rolling back in the day, and
the interesting thing with this is that they were also not-for-profit foundations, right? So that means that they were tax exempt,
right?
Which makes it all the more interesting because it's all charitable work that's going on. Yes, we're doing it for the betterment of humanity. Yes, of course. But they want to make it in their own image. And it's a very small group of people that we're talking about here. So a guy, go ahead.
Okay, well, yeah, because I know you want to get this audio going here, but it's very interesting to see how much of a radical shift the education system went through in that short period of time. Like, if you combine it, or if you took a look at how education worked, like say in the 1800s up to that early 1900s,
it was much more individualized.
Yes, it was very individualized. Yeah. You sometimes it was just one teacher teaching one kid, focusing on their strengths, in a small, classroom, maybe a one classroom building or whatever. Everything was much more tailored to the individual. And then once these endowments and foundations got involved in shaping the education system, that's when you started getting the more what we would call industrialized education, where it was all cookie cutter. Everybody just sort of, pack as many kids.
Dumbing down, right? That's what they want.
Deliberate dumbing down, right?
What's the classic saying? Make them smart enough to be able to operate the machines, but too dumb to question authority or want or desire to question authority. That's exactly what's happened. You make automatons. That's what you do. When you have, here's another area where you can see this behavior pan out. And again, it's all done peace and safety. Just remember, in your head, those two words, and you're going to see it everywhere, and how it's used to control you. Health, what do they call it? Environmental health and safety. In corporate America, it's hysteria. That is like the most unbelievable hysteria going on in manufacturing and services, you name it, right? It is pushed on you to no extent, and everything is about eliminating risk. Now, we all know that life is nothing but risk. Day in and day out, that's life. It's survival. It's very risky. But it's also how you gain life experience. It's also how we learn. There's a whole lot that goes into it. When you start trying to take that away and you force life to be an SOP, standard operating procedure, if you will, you become effectively automatons. You are being mind controlled. You are basically being told what to do and doing it.
Right. And it plays into the whole, bubble wrap society where you try to keep everyone sheltered.
And you become, but you become a compliant, passive, right? You want to be safe. You don't want to get hurt.
Right. And what happens to a lot of these people when they actually have to deal with life and when hardships come their way? They're like a deer in headlights. They don't know how to handle it. Yeah, right. Yeah. So
just locked right up. So this is the important thing to understand, is that is what truly is at the heart of it all. That's why, I've always been a proponent of you educate people as to what the risks are, but let them make the decisions on what's best for them to be able to mitigate that risk. But you can't tell people and just, first of all, the worst thing you can do is tell them no. Because we know what happens when you tell humans no. That's idiotic, because telling people no never, ever gets, it never ends well for anything. It just ends up being very bad, because you always have enough people that want to, that don't, especially in a society where even the most liberal of individuals are true Puritans at heart. They really are. because they're going to tell you which way is best for you, and it's their way, and that's it. So, with that said, all this chaos, all this wild stuff, Scotty, that's going on, I think it would be good to bring Kent Hovind into this conversation because, and we've had him on the show before, and let me tell you something. He's a spitfire. Even, matter of fact, I used to call him in prison, and just an uplifted individual, even in prison. He actually took up a friendship with my son, who at the time was going to, we were a homeschool family, but we used to go to a co-op and all that stuff. And Dr. Dino was pretty big in the church circuit, you know? So I kind of want to bring this up here because
this world.
He is a guy that used his church to kind of push, not so much push, but educate people about the risks of life as we go on and what the real things that are happening. What is it that's going on? And holy moly, he got super popular. Dr. Dino. He was very famous for debating people when it came to evolutionary theory, and went all over the world doing so. So I'm going to get my screen going here, Scotty, and we'll play this little clip. This little clip was what he used, or what basically was the start of his persecution, which again resulted in him being in prison for, oh man, long time. But a good friend, and here he is,
Satan
Ken Hovind.
is making plans to rule the world. Kind of like Pinky and the Brain, you know. God's up in heaven laughing about it.
And by the way, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what religion or if you're religious at all. This is awesome.
It'll calm you right down. It's a good tranquilizer. Why do the heathen rage? The people imagine vain thing. The kings of the earth set themselves. The rulers take counsel together against the Lord, against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. God is laughing at their plans for a new world order. You want to read some good books? Read 7 men who ruled the world from the grave based on their philosophy. What you believe determines how you behave. That is for sure, okay? Or if you want to know some things you can do about it in America to help slow things down, be sure to get this book about jury nullification. You know, one person on the jury can just vote not guilty if they don't like the law. The question is not, are they guilty or not? The question is the law reasonable? I don't like that law, not guilty. Amazing book. You ought to read that. It's just $1. Henry Morris has an awesome book called The Long War Against God. That is a must-read for anybody studying creation and evolution. It's a bitter fruit coming off of an evil tree, folks. Evolution is also the foundation philosophy for the New World Order. There's an excellent video you can get from our ministry, Megiddo 1 and Megiddo 2. You want to study what's really going on and get the whole philosophy of what's happening so you can get the big picture. I recommend call our ministry and get those. We just ordered those here recently. Or lots more in our college class, 103. Evil men have already divided up the world into regions, and they've got it all planned. They want to rule the world. Their goal is to reduce the population to 500 million, with a few of them as the elite get to rule the world. There's a committee of 300 that basically pull the strings. We spend all day talking about that. I don't have time tonight. But they've got their plans to rule the world. You know, like Pinky and the Brain. What are we going to do today, Pinky? We're going to go take over the world. It's what we always do, you know. God's in heaven laughing about it, okay? If you want to study some of the conspiracies, if you get into that kind of stuff, there have been numerous conspiracies. Get the Medusa File or the American Conspiracy, New American Magazine, The Conspiracy, see what's really happening. We could spend a long time talking about that, about the conspiracy. There's the committee of 300 that really are controlling and pulling the strings, or the Illuminati, top 13 bloodlines of the Illuminati, the super rich bazillionaires, the rich who want to rule the world. But that would be for those who want the red pill only, for those who've seen The Matrix. What they do is they develop a crisis intentionally so that they can bring in their solution to the crisis. That many events like the Civil War, World War I, the 1929 Depression, they are intentionally caused to make people come in and cooperate, whatever the reason may be, okay? The 29 Depression was to make everybody get a Social Security number. That was the purpose of that. Cuban Missile Crisis was intentionally done. Okay, Oklahoma City bombing was intentionally allowed to stop the militia movement going on here in America. Call Ben Parton, the Air Force explosives expert. He says that no truck bomb blew up that building. The pillars were sheared off. That was C4 explosives wrapped around the pillars. Many folks are convinced the government was involved in taking down the building in Oklahoma City. And same thing with the Twin Tower bombing. Go to get the website 911inplainsight.com. Has anybody seen the movie In Plain Sight? Anybody seen that? David Rockefeller said, we're on a verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis, and the nations will accept the New World Order. See, God has plans for the world, and so does Satan. And Satan's plan is no people here, maybe just a few, and a one-world government. The Bible says perilous times shall come. The people will be fierce, despisers of those that are good. Christians are going to be absolutely hated. You can already see the animosity toward Christians on TV. You know, if there's a bad guy in the movie and he's an axe-wielding person, you know, beating everybody up, it's always somebody quoting Bible verses, isn't it? Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. You know why he's out there killing people.
I want to say something real quick about that. That is not necessarily a religious thing or a Christian thing or any other thing. It is a war against creation. That's it. What's original? Man, woman, for 5,000-6,000 years, right? They're attacking the standard definition of. When really, if you think about it, you have variations and all that kind of stuff, but they're using it in such a manner to attack. And I just want people to see it. It's not so much a religious thing as much as it's attack against the traditional definition of.
Well, I think there's an attack on spirituality in general.
In general, right?
And
because why, you know why? Why? Why do you think that is?
Well, because they don't want people to. They want people to look at the government as their god, right?
Very good.
And right, you know, and if you have your faith into something that's higher, you will never ever bow to a government or anything like that, because you know that there is a higher power out there that supersedes anything on this mortal plane, right?
Doesn't matter if you worship a sunbeam toaster. Doesn't matter, because that gives you individuality. That gives you something that the government can't control.
Right, exactly. It's something that the government cannot control. And but I think it's interesting that he brings this up, because I mean, I think we've seen this play out here recently with a certain event that happened in Tennessee, and how all of a sudden the person who committed this horrible act, there's a lot of sympathy going that way, when normally no one would be sympathetic towards somebody that has committed a horrific act of that nature.
But changing of behavioral patterns, yes, and pushing it out. Look at Bud Light putting the transgender person on the beer can or whatever it was.
Right, but because the individuals, the victims of this horrific act, happen to be, you know, of a religious
and let me say this:
all of a sudden it's like, right, exactly.
Yeah. Who gives a crap if they put a transgender on Bud Light? Who cares? But I don't care if they put a guy in a fuzzy bunny suit on there. I don't give a crap. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? This is how Bernays got people to really kind of hone in on product to desires relationship, and how they got them to change people's behavior by going after what they desire, not what they
behavioral
need, you know?
behavioral modification and being able to steer the masses in a direction that you want them to go. And like you said, I mean, Bernays was the master at this, right? Because it's all psychological. There's so much research and everything that went into this on how to manipulate a person's emotions, how to manipulate their thoughts, how to get them to steer in a direction. And of course, I mean, we're bombarded with it 24/7 all the time.
Yeah, now the
everything
guy,
we see.
now the premier guy, he's old as hell now, but still wicked relevant. Claude Rapai. One of these days, I got to get him on so we could have a talk, because that guy is like Bernays times 2. And you watch him at all these events, marketing events, all that stuff. I mean, he is just by far one of the heavy hitters in mind control for the masses, and just very effective. So I'm going to get back to Ken Hovind, but seriously think about this, not so much from the Christian's perspective, because that's going to box you in. Don't do that. You know, he has to. I mean, heck, he's doing it during a sermon, so understand that.
Just think of it from more of just a general spiritual,
spiritual sense, right? And what that does for a human being, as far as being an individual,
right?
And that's really why there's such a move afoot to take it away or marginalize it every chance they get. So here he goes.
Make the Christians and preachers look awful on TV. One of the groups to really watch in this plan for the New World Order is FEMA. Boy, they have taken over my city since the hurricanes. There's just no question. They are in charge, all right? Just keep an eye on that group. George Bush told the Iraqi soldiers they should disobey if they're given orders to use poison gas or blow up wells. He said, because after the war, they're going to be judged. Okay, American soldiers, you took a vow to defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. If you get an order that goes against the Constitution, you better disobey that order. So I'll get court-martialed. Yep, probably so. You do what's right, okay? Who's doing this? What's going on? And what do we do about it? Okay, there are all kinds of people involved in this plan toward a new world order. The United Nations, the World Council of Churches. If you go to a church that's a member of that, get out, okay? Council of Foreign Relations, CFR, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergers, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, the International Bankers, the Club of Rome, the Communists, the Socialists, National NEA, National Education Association. Get out of that bunch if you're in it, okay? Or ACLU or the Masonic Lodge. Most people in the Masonic Lodge don't realize what they're in. They think they're in a do-gooders club. And it won't be till it's too late when they realize this was a satanic organization. General Albert Pike, 33rd degree Mason, leader of all the Masons years ago, said, that which we must say to the crowd is, we worship a God, but it is a God that wanted doors without superstition. To you, sovereign grand inspectors general, we say this, that you may repeat it to the brethren of the 32nd, 31st, and 30th degrees. The Masonic religion should be by all of us initiates of the high degrees maintained in the purity of the Luciferian doctrine. Yes, Lucifer is God. When the Mason learns the key to the warrior on the block is the proper appliance of the dynamo of living power, he has learned the mystery of his craft. The seething energies of Lucifer are in his hands, and before he may step onward and upward, he must prove his ability to properly handle energy. Good book on the Masonic Lodge. This one you can get from chick.com or get it from our ministry. If you call there, we'll get you some. Excellent book on Masons and what they really, really are for. Okay, what do we do? Real simple. Exactly what Jesus told us to do. He said, go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them, get people saved and teach them to go do the same. You realize Jesus grew up in the middle of the Roman Empire? His country had been taken over. He didn't spend 1 minute trying to change the Roman Empire. He went after people, win souls. Hosea said, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. What do we do? There are perilous times coming to this country and to the world, real serious times. I think probably real soon. I'll be really shocked if we make it 5 more years. I'm going to be surprised. What do we do? Well, what we need are some men and women who have understanding to know what to do. What should we do? The Bible says, for the transgression of the land, many are the princes thereof, but by a man of understanding and knowledge, the state thereof shall be prolonged. I got 4 grandkids. Man, I want to prolong the state. I want them to have some freedom and peace to grow up in also like I had. What do? Deuteronomy says, take you wise men and understanding. Boy, we need some people with understanding. Solomon prayed and said, give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. Do you want to have understanding? The Bible says Abigail was a woman of good understanding. And beautiful. That don't hurt, throw that in too, but okay. They sent him men of understanding. Ezra chapter 8. By the good hand of our God upon us, they brought us a man of understanding. And the children of Issachar, which were men that had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. I wish we had some politicians that had understanding of the times to know what America ought to do. I don't think we have too many. Most of the politicians, cut their finger in the wind. Hey, which way you blowing? Which way's the wind blowing? I'll lead. We need some statesmen, not politicians. You know what politics is? Poly means many, and a tick is a blood-sucking animal. Okay. I think it's time to get motivated, folks. I don't know what you're doing, but it's time to get really moving. We are rapidly running out of time. What do? Okay. Number one, you need to realize God's in control. Don't get nervous. Get busy, but don't get nervous. Okay? He's the potter, we're the clay. Do what he says. Simple, okay? We should be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Be careful for nothing, full of care. Don't get nervous. Just get busy. We should pray for those in authority. See, if you were praying for your senators, you would know their names. Wouldn't you? Yeah, okay? We're his children. Our job is to obey him. Preach the gospel, okay? We're supposed to be the salt of the earth. Did you know salt does a lot of interesting things? Salt preserves. You should be a preserving force in your community. Salt irritates. If nobody's irritated at you, you're not a good Christian. You say, Brother Hovind, did you know there's 1,000 anti-Hovind websites? Oh, I know, ain't it great? We're going for 2,000 this year. You ought to be irritating somebody or you're not doing it right, okay? We should use your influence on other people. Our local director of science curriculum, I called down there years ago when I was trying to change the curriculum in Escambia County. She was a raving evolutionist. She said, Mr. Hovind, you are the only person who calls in here and complains about the evolution in the textbooks. I thought, where's everybody else? There's 128 Baptist churches in Escambia County, Florida. What are they doing? We're supposed to use our influence, man. People say Christians shouldn't get in politics. Oh, yeah, tell that to King David or King Solomon.
When he says Christian, remember, too, it has nothing to do with that. He's saying, get knowledge, right? Because knowledge is power. And then, just like salt, preserve it, meaning you kind of centralize it, you get it, you understand it, and then you start sending it out. Well, it's going to irritate a lot of people. Note that when you become more understanding of the way the things really are, when you start going down that rabbit hole, it ends up taking you on a journey where you become less and less able to interact with people because of that irritation. You'll notice it. You'll become a black sheep in many ways because tradition becomes one of the least important things for you. The truth is what really becomes your driving force. And it's kind of like what journalism is supposed to be, right? Always follow the truth because the truth is the story. And you can't have anything that would bias you in any way or box you in. Otherwise, you'll never get there. Something's going to skew you off.
You're going against the grain, right?
That's right.
And you're no longer just flowing with wherever society goes, and just accepting the propaganda and the agenda of everything being pushed on you. When you start asking questions and start looking into the truth, all of a sudden, you're right.
So in his sense, right? So in Kent's sense, and this was done, I want to say about 2010-ish when this was made. And by the way, his son Eric went on to do some fabulous work, making a series about Genesis and all sorts of stuff. So, the Hovens have been very influential in so many ways, whether it be the whole creation versus evolution arena, or like you see here, which is kind of speaking truth to power, but using the pulpit for it and kind of weaving in a little Christianity a little in there too. And in such a fashion where it's not, you just don't get that feeling like it's, because I know how that is. I'm a believer.
He's not bashing it into
right.
Yeah, he's not trying
like
to bash it into your right.
Yeah.
Right. And so he's just kind of laying it out in a very clear, concise, easy to understand, digestible way, and just like you said, he's just telling it.
Yeah, I went to prison
telling it out
on this tax thing. I mean, it's crazy, but when I think he got like a 10-year sentence. So it was terrible time for him. But
it's always a convenient tax thing, right? That they always try to nail people on, right?
That's right. Absolutely. So here he goes. There's some more of Dr. Hovind.
You should teach the truth about creation. One of the greatest ministries available today, I think, is a creation ministry. Find something to do. People will sit and listen to a tape about dinosaurs or creation that will never come to church for any other reason. Won't they, brother? If you're getting into it now? Awesome. There's two great sermons in the book of Acts. Acts chapter 2, Peter preached, on the day of Pentecost, and he quoted scripture after scripture after scripture. He's talking to Jews. That's the way you talk to them. They want to be reasoned with from the scriptures. Acts 17, they go to Mars Hill. He's talking to a bunch of heathen that don't know anything about scripture and don't care. Paul didn't quote one scripture in that whole sermon, Acts 17. He said, I want to talk to you about the unknown God, the creator of the universe. God that made the heavens, he used creation to win them. Number 9, don't get distracted. It's so easy in this world, especially in America, to get distracted. How many have ever seen these little mobiles you put over the crib? You wind it up and the kid lays there and goes, It's so easy to get distracted. The average American watches 1,500 hours of TV a year. That's enough time to read your Bible 22 times. I don't think you have to read your Bible all the time, but you ought to read it some, Speaking of watching TV, Psalmist said, I will set no wicked thing before mine eyes. Do you put wicked things in front of your eyes? What if you made a rule around your house that if you hear a cuss word on TV, you're going to shut it off for 2 hours? What if you made a rule that said if you see somebody who's not modestly dressed, you're going to shut it off for 2 hours? If you see somebody drinking alcohol, you're going to shut it off for 2 hours. How much would you watch? Well, we could all cancel that cable and we could support 45 more missionaries just out of this room, couldn't we? Bible says, for the transgression of the land, many are the princes thereof. You know why we got so many bureaucrats, so many rules and regulations? We're wicked. This is God's judgment. All this heavy-handed government is God's judgment on our country. We deserve it. Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Here's the solution. You want to help save America? It's real simple. Here's the solution. If my people, which are called by my name, shall vote Republican, join the militia, and store up survival foods. Not quite what it says, is it? If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves. Hey, dads, when's the last time your kids saw you humble yourself? Hey, when's the last time your kids saw you come to the altar and pray for somebody? When's the last time your kids saw you pray for anything? When's the last time your kids heard you say, I'm sorry, I was wrong? Moms, when's the last time you humbled yourself? Kids, when's the last time you humbled yourself? When's the last time you told your brother, look, brother, I'm sorry, I was wrong, forgive me? When's the last time?
I want to think about that for a second too. Hold on, I'm going to stop there because wow. That's a huge one. That's a behavioral shift that's gone and become very prevalent. And I want to say that comes from, if I was to kind of push it back, it's the online environment, not having the human interface as much. It's not as important, even though it is, it's not, if you know what I mean. Behavior is now shifted to where that eye to eye, man to man, or whatever interface is just not. It's super critical in life, but it's not there anymore. And as a result, it's changing behavior, Scotty.
Right, because most of the crap that people say online, they would never say to that individual face to face. Right. And not only that, I mean, look at the lack of accountability that people have nowadays.
Yes.
Nobody takes responsibility for their actions anymore. Nobody is willing to say, hey, you know what? I was wrong. I'm sorry, or, you don't
have to face it.
Yeah. Or, people don't, they're not even willing to give an inch on their point of view. Right.
Think about it. Think about that. You're right. But why? Why? Because you don't have to face these people.
Right.
You don't have to face them. It's not like you're getting up in front of the class and reading a report or something like, or giving your views there. You're not going to say what you would normally say if you had to face somebody. If you had to be real, you know what I mean?
No
and
one is
really
willing.
What it's all about. It's about being real.
Right.
That's
and
what
no one is willing. No one is willing to have civil debate. No one's willing to have civil debate. No one's willing to concede that, you know what, maybe their point of view might have been wrong, or find any sort of middle ground in any situation.
Because they don't have to, because you can have balls of steel on the other side of a screen and a camera. Of course you can. But do that face to face. And you'll end up finding that it's not as easy as you might think. That even the most brave individual ends up behaving differently in person than they would remotely, virtually. It doesn't. That's the whole point, is we are changing fundamentally. And half the time, no one really realizes, or it could be a byproduct of, but there is a certain change afoot,
and then
that's changing fundamentally how humans behave. And really, if you think about it, it's all centered on the fact that people aren't real. They're not.
But then on top of it, you also have this whole mob mentality thing where they do organize these things online, right? And then they all get together and say a protest or whatever. And then the mob mentality takes over, because then you're still not dealing with people on an individual basis. Now you're in a mob of people that all have the same, mentality and idea. And so then you fall into mob rule and mob.
But think about this, because it makes perfect sense. Because if you dumb people down, which is effectively what they've done, look at the literacy rates. Washington D.C., especially post-pandemic, it's abysmal. It's crashed. The education system has crashed. What do you think Common Core was and all that crap? I mean, this is all stuff engineered specifically to dumb people down. Then you throw in all of these little things, pandemics, Great Recession, transgender, all these things, and it just freaking they use it to make slow course changes over time that eventually we're often, like I say, we're off in Timbuktu. It really is that simple. Just the fact that we are now on a more remote setting where somebody moves into the neighborhood now, it's not the welcoming committee that comes over. People are peering at through the blinds because they're not comfortable going to you in person. People don't like to go do in-person things as much. It's just not it's not natural anymore. Why? Because people's behaviors have changed. They've shifted. And it's just going to get worse as it goes on, especially like with, VR and haptics all kind of mature. Oh, man. And that's the whole thing, like I say, you can be there's no fear of death or injury to oneself or a fear of rejection or fear of anything like that. Because you could just shut things off. You could just hang up. You could just walk away and you're still you. And you haven't been harmed in any way. Your online persona may have been, but you are still okay. It just ends up changing fundamentally how you behave. It's really unbelievable. So there's many ways that this happens, but fundamental to that is certainly demoralization. And I don't mean that from any religious standpoint. I mean it from like a societal standpoint, from the fact that what the hell who cares what your sexuality is? If you go to work, you go to work. You don't go to work because you're a different sex or whatever, or it has no bearing on professionalism. So who cares? But because politics have become so tied to one's identity, and that's where they get you. When your identity is tied to these things, then it becomes a problem. And so they had to tie people's identities to these things first. They have to establish the behavior first so they can then manipulate afterwards. That's what's happened. That's been the playbook.
And then using the education system to force it on children.
Yes. At an early age, you normalize it. Even if it's just exposure for but a brief moment, it doesn't matter because the shock factor's gone now.
Right.
Now it's gone. You've planted the seed. No matter if it's just the words they hear, that's it. And they know it. So it's important that they go about doing it that way. Now, the other problem that you have, though, is that we're entering a time where the system itself is quite unstable. And they know this. Also know that this Ukraine war and everything about it is not what it appears to be. Just like the Taiwanese Chinese thing is not what it appears to be. The unrest in Israel is not what it appears to be. All of these things are at some point in time converge up where there's a very, very small group of people that control these things. And they have access
at the very least, the narrative about these things is being controlled.
That's much more so that they can direct the chaos as best they can.
Right.
They're not making the chaos happen. They're just utilizing it to their advantage. And they have the tools to be able to not let a crisis go to waste, as you've heard.
Right. Rahm Emanuel, never let a good crisis go to waste.
You've got these endowments. Norman Dodd was on in hour one talking about that. He passed away in 1987. That was done a year before he passed away. And they shut that investigation down. But what they showed was the education system, very, very important. Also, when it comes to research, so you go to these prestigious universities, and a lot of them have like quantum computers, AI, deep AI, and they have access to these sentient world simulations and things like that. Things that these endowment guys, these trustees at the turn of the 20th century would never have imagined. Never in their wildest dreams could they imagine having access to an AI that could analyze the best way to bring about a communist or a collectivist curriculum and execute it and deploy it, and boom. They have no idea. But that's the kind of tools that they have. That, oh, look at this. Something happened over in Israel. Let's plot. What AI? What do you think is going to happen? And probably we'll figure out that the more likely than not scenario that it'll go, and they'll plan for it. They'll make money on it. They'll do things, take advantage of it, and then move on. And that's the way it's been. These things are not what they appear to be or what you're being told. But I won't say anything more than that, because it's not the way that it's often portrayed, like, oh, wow, what do they say? It's the Rothschilds, blah, 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 or this or that. No. But that's not to say they're not taking advantage of a situation. It's just, no. What I do see, though, is all of this chaos culminating in the Great Reset, something that the World Economic Forum has put out ad nauseum. And if that's the case, then the next step would be, okay, yeah, we'll provide your housing. We'll give you 3 squares a day. And there'll be movies on the green on Saturday. All your needs will be taken care of. And all you have to do is do your job. That's it. And they'll give you a job. And based on aptitude or whatever, fine. As time goes on and birth rates continue to plummet, by then they'll figure out a way to just keep the human race sustained through artificial means.
I mean, what do they do in China? Hey, as long as you do your job in the factory, we'll provide you housing in the factory city that's built around it, and you get fed and whatnot. Just do your work like a good old worker bee, and everything will be just fine. Don't worry about the mental breakdown you might have in the nets that we put around the Foxconn factory. Don't worry about that. But hey,
yeah.
We'll take care of it.
Zero Hedge, one of their leading articles, California's education priorities are focusing on equity quotas. What does that do? That just again marginalizes a person's ability to excel, because basically what they're selling is prison culture, which is don't stand out, be as part of the crowd as you possibly can, and you'll survive. And that's kind of the way it is. That's the way it goes. Just think about how school is, and from a very, very early age, it's mind control. Ring the bell, go here, ring the bell, go there. You have 5 minutes. You have 15 minutes.
Pavlovian training.
Yep. Speaking of that, Bill just rang the bell and said we have 5 minutes. And we are quite mind controlled. So we do, but again, it's all about that kind of thing, that mind control. Twitter's open source code has reference to government requested influence. Duh. That's the Free Thought Project. Even Mr. Eon, bombthrower.com. Oh, did I say that? Uh-oh. That's not good. Anyway, this website has a pretty good insight into the mind control aspect of the whole situation here. Then we have the banking crisis. right? So that's still going on. We don't realize it, but there's a $1.7 trillion in unrealized losses that are looming right now that corporations have not taken credit for yet. See, all these corporations are going through first quarter close right now. And it's going to hit Wall Street like a freaking lead balloon when it finally gets there. It's going to be bad. So that's coming. See, there's a lot of things that just haven't hit yet. Oh, this is fun. And then multi-tenant apartment building sales are dropped 74%, the most since 2008. So that's very interesting. They're seeing the rental market just start to torpedo. Now, I wouldn't normally have a problem with that, Scotty. However, do you know who the biggest investor in this kind of real estate has been basically since the Great Recession?
I believe it's BlackRock.
Yes. Yes.
Go figure. Right?
Oh, they bought high. They bought a lot of things high, and a lot of their funds have a lot of exposure to this. So there's a couple of things cooking here, right? You have all those bonds that these banks bought at a very low interest rate. They're getting just absolutely hammered now because the interest rates are a lot higher now, and those bonds aren't worth spit, basically, relative to these other ones, and no one wants these bonds that they're trying to sell, so they got basically stuck with a bunch of these bonds. And then you've got the real estate, which no one can afford a house these days. And now with interest rates the way it is, no one's really going to afford the houses at those prices. So what happens? Oh, they're going to take a bath. And it's a damn shame. And that's all I'm going to say. Because we're out of time. Any closing thoughts, buddy?
No, it's always interesting to go back and listen to these people and the things that they say back in the past, right? You know, I mean, it always blows my mind about, you know, a lot of the stuff that was predicted and warned about and everything, and you know, these people were just crackpot crazies, you know, spouting conspiracy theories, you know, and now it's all playing out.
There's truth in all of it, right? Doesn't really matter who it is or what says it. You know, I used to hear a lot about Louis Farrakhan, and don't get me wrong, guy is a very interesting fella. We'll put it that way. But he spouts some truth from time to time. Whether you agree with him or not, truth does come out of his mouth from time to time.
A very, very polarizing figure, no doubt. But sometimes he would just drop these things that were like, "Oh, dang," you know.
Okay. Yeah. So, don't always be quick to judge. Always be humble. Remember that, and take risk. Right? Understand risk. You don't have to take unnecessary risk, but don't be afraid of risk. Because I think the only way you can defeat this thing that's going on is to be yourself. Don't be somebody you're not. Be yourself, be humble, and be smart.
Yeah.
And we're out of time. So we'll see you later, alligators. This is the Freedom Link. Joey and Scotty signing off.